I mean, of course I'm going to be anti-Nazi and anti-skinhead, right? But
well, we've talked about that a lot too, because when we do the events, you know, all these hit pieces that come out, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Well, when they say that your audience is all these angry white men and all of this nonsense, which every night it is proven to be false. It's like, yeah, you address that every night, talking about the bad identity politics of the right, but it's not something that fully...
The thing that's strange, and that ties into what you're saying as well, is that it isn't obvious to me who the dangerous right are. You know, it's obvious to me who the dangerous left are because they occupy the universities. But
it's not just the universities. This isn't, I mean, this is so misthunk, if you will, that we have to really break the frame and reweave it. So, the journalists keep saying, oh, you guys are focusing on a tiny problem afflicting a few universities that mostly nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah, that's definitely not true.
Well, the first thing is that it deflects the problem from the number one problem isn't the universities, it's journalism. And so the idea is that the journalists are saying, you guys are complaining about this small story in the university. It's like, no, you're getting it wrong. We're complaining about the number one story, which is the sense-making apparatus having gone haywire. And if you think about these journalists that we're now dealing with as like the hermit crabs that have crawled into the shells that we used to know, right?
Yes,
so
yes,
whether
exactly.
CNN or NPR or National Review or whatever these structures are, it's a different group of hermit crabs. The shells are the same. And the great danger is that if you recognize the font at the top of the LA Times and the New York Times, you think you're getting the same product, but the product has become radically different. And there was a problem back then. I'm not saying that there wasn't. And you know, of course, the issue is that when we criticize journalists now, they think we are criticizing journalism. Far from it. We are praying for journalism, the return of journalism. Exactly. And the idea is that we are fighting this thing where they've got their fingers so clearly on the scale that everything is being tipped, and what you're getting is a more distorted reality. There's some point at which, and we have to talk about what happened with, I don't know how to pronounce it best, iatrogenics in medicine, right? The idea that doctors are created a huge amount of the harm found in hospitals. Well,
medical errors are the fourth leading cause of death.
Right. So now we have to talk not about iatrogenics, which is that which originates from the healers, but journogenics, which is what is the harm done to the truth by journalists, and that is.
So I have a technological slant on that to some degree, because one of the things that I think is happening, because I've watched large organizations degenerate, because I've worked as a consultant for a lot of years now. It's really interesting to see how fast a large organization that you think is semi-permanent can disintegrate. It can happen, well, certainly within the span of a couple of years, and sometimes a lot faster than that. Yes, well, and I think one of the things that seems to be happening to me is that as television dies under the weight of YouTube primarily, but let's say online video, and perhaps also podcasts, is that the remaining journalists, the hermit crabs who occupy the old shells, which is a good way of thinking about it, get increasingly desperate for attention. And so they're pushed by economic pressure in some sense and situational pressure to exaggerate the danger. It's like, and it's a clickbait phenomena essentially. And it seems to me to be akin to what's happened with reports on the crime rate. So, you know, over the last 25 years, the 5 major indices of violent crime have declined by 50%. Which is absolutely, in the United States, staggering decrease. But the rate of reporting of violent crime has gone up substantially. And so people think that things are more dangerous now than they were, even though they're safer now than they have been since the early 60s, and they were safer then than they'd ever been in history. So I think one of the things, and it's interesting to think about the technological forces driving this, because YouTube and podcasts do pose a fatal threat, I would say, certainly to television. And so it makes sense to me that as the journalists become less professional and less in demand, and their message is chasing a diminishing audience, that they're going to get noisier and noisier about what's going on. And the trick for everyone else who's being immersed in that is to stay sane and sensible while the death throes play themselves out.
So wouldn't you naturally think, though, that more of them would start seeing this? I mean, what we now see so clearly, and that more of them would be jumping ship? Or is that old shell so tainted or corroded that getting out of that thing is almost impossible?
It has to do with systems of selective pressure. So Jordan raises an excellent point that the dying throes of an institution tend to be its most violent because it's in go for broke mode. And it's not worrying about tomorrow. It's worrying about maybe buying another month or two or who knows what.
Right.
But there's another issue, of course, which is that the formats are set so that your news comes to you in a form that is more or less the same every day, and so you know how to consume it. So everybody who listens to NPR has a pre-grooved template in their brain. I'm going to get the top stories at the top of the hour, then there are going to be this many pieces, and there'll be like a feel-good story, and so you know exactly what you're going to get. And like here, we don't know what we're going to get. Maybe Jordan and I are going to come to blows. Something could happen.
We're hoping.
You got to change the drink, but. But the other thing that is that in the system of selective pressures, as the business model fails, you have a fascinating phenomenon which people who are willing to accept strange blends of payment. So lower financial payment and security, job security, but higher psychic payment stemming from the idea that they are crusading are going to start to dominate. So you're seeing many more people who are willing to substitute activism and the sense that they are protagonists in a great story about the resistance, let's say.
Yeah.
Right, so that actually becomes more and more necessary as the stability and the viability of the system degenerates.
Right. If you could offer, $200,000 salaries to good reporters in short order, so that they could start families and buy homes and have an easier life. Like one of the things that you need to do is you need to pay people more if you're unhappy with them. And this, I think, I learned
I've thought that about professors actually. That if sociology professors had their salaries tripled, they'd be a lot less radically.
I learned this from the New Orleans Police Department, where at some point they had corruption where people were ordering mob-style hits over police radio. And I think what happened was that the new police chief came in and he said the first thing he did was raise salaries. And the idea being that you have to have skin in the game, thanks to Nassim Taleb, as that phrase is proliferated, thanks Nassim, wherever you are. And you need to give people something to defend. And so it's very important to pay the people that we are decrying all the time more money.
We could say everybody who's listening should go online and donate to Quillette's Patreon page.
Yeah, Quillette's doing great work.
Quillette is doing great work.
But I'm saying that we should try to figure out how to get Vox more money as well. And we should try to figure out how to get Slate and Salon and all of these things so that you can afford to pay people in ways in which they don't have to take a large portion of their payment as psychic gratification from having felled imaginary dragons.
But just to be clear there, when you're saying that, you're not saying that the current people who have screwed this whole thing up deserve more money, right?
Well, actually, you're going to find I have a very strange position on this, which is, my friend Peter Thiel and I talk about this all the time. His model is that at some level, when the economy isn't working, people engage in this kind of nonsensical, fratricide of a type. And my point is slightly different, which is this bad nature is always there, but it's like a compromised immune system. When the economy starts to fail, you start to become aware of all of the pathogens in the world because it can't fight them off. And so it's very much the issue that if you're the guy with a compromised immune system, you're the only one aware of all the pathogens in the world. And so at the moment, our collective economic immunity system is failing. And I actually am much more pessimistic than you are, Jordan. I see lots of reasons to be happy about the decrease in violence, but one of the problems with the accounting in these theories is that the sword of Damocles that hangs over our heads, has gotten quite large, and the number of threads holding it up seem very few in number. And so you have to do the potential energy accounting as well as the realized violence, and also understanding that the nature of income inequality and differential access to financial markets and technology is creating a lot of very justifiable concern that the post-World War II stability is constantly in jeopardy. And if we don't, I personally think we should think about a once every 5 years above-ground nuclear test to remind ourselves of what it is that we've pushed underground and we haven't seen for years, because we are engaged in some kind of magical thinking that the world is fairly stable and that can turn on a dime.
So